Central Bank of Russia adds 700,000 ounces of gold to its reserves in August. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I track the Russian and Chinese gold reserves each and every month. The way to go to see those is go to smaulgld.com, click on gold, go to gold reserves by country, slide over. You can get the Russian gold, Chinese gold, and even Indian gold import data. Also, remember to subscribe to smaulgld.com. I don't do a podcast on all the news that we break. And if in order to do that, just enter your email there and you will receive the important Smaulgld blog posts when and as they come out. All right, let's get into what Russia did in August. So they added 700,000 ounces of gold, or approximately 21.77 tons of gold, to their reserves. They've now added this year about 110 tons of gold to their reserves. That brings their total up to about 1,527, which makes them the sixth largest gold holding nation on Earth. An important fact is that the Russian central bank is adding gold to her reserves about 50% faster than the People's Bank of China is. Overall, Russian reserves, farm reserves, are up about 6.5% since January to $395.2 billion. So Russia's financial house is pretty much in order despite the lower oil prices. It has actually added reserves, also added to its gold reserve position, and kept its U.S. Treasury security holdings relatively stable since unloading a good portion of them about a year and a half ago. We'll get to that in a second. So here you can see, and you can see it much better on the Smaulgld website, the growth in Russian gold reserves since June of 2015 from 1,281 tons all the way up to 1,527. Here you can see a month-by-month chart of Russian gold additions to their reserves. As you can see, 700,000 in August. Their most they've done recently is back in, looks like September of 2014. They added 1.2 million tons, million ounces, not 1.2 million tons. Now here's what I want to mention is the comparison between Russian additions to their gold reserves and Chinese additions. Now remember, we're talking this central bank. Clearly there's more gold in China. It's a tired argument. China's lying. No, they're not. It's the People's Bank of China reporting its gold reserves versus the Russian central bank reporting their gold reserves. This is not all the gold in Russia or all the gold in China. It's what's on the balance sheet of the respective central banks. And as you can see, Russia has been adding at a much bigger pace. The red lines represent Russian gold additions. The blue lines represent Chinese. And there has not been a month, it looks like, nope, where China has added more gold to her reserves than Russia has. Here is your top 10 gold reserves, top 10 countries holding gold. As you can see, the United States is first. Russia is sixth. China is fifth. IMF doesn't count as a country. So you go U.S., Germany, Italy, France, China, Russia. Now, there was a story out, it's making the rounds, getting a lot of gold bugs excited, that central banks are adding to gold at the best pace they have in decades. Well, it's kind of a misnomer because the only central banks that are adding any substantial gold to the reserves are Russia and China. And to a certain extent, Kazakhstan has added some tonnage to their gold reserves. This number here, the United States, 8,133 tons, has not changed since 1971. When Nixon closed the gold window, that's where the gold reserve stood. The United States has not added any gold that they've reported to her gold reserves. Germany may have repatriated some gold from New York Fed that was being held for safekeeping during the Cold War. It has not added any. Italy has not added any. France has not added any. Switzerland was selling up to about 10 years ago. They haven't added any. Japan, Netherlands, India. None of these. Netherlands has repatriated some gold, but none of these countries are adding gold. Anyway, if you want to see the top 40, I've done charts on that. You go to, just go to Smaulgld, click here, go to gold reserves by country. You can see the top 40. And the only movement in those charts are Kazakhstan, Russia, and China adding gold to their gold reserves. Now, Russia's foreign reserves have increased, and they are all the way up to about 395 billion. The central bank, the president of Russia, had said that they want to get to 500 billion. But given that the Russian central bank or the Russian economy has been, it's really not much of an economy. It's based on oil exports, hasn't been doing very well. It's a sign of prudent stewardship of the Russian central bank that they even have a solid reserve position, whereas a country like Mexico, and we've covered this, is down to just $48 billion in U.S. Treasuries when it was once up about 100 billion. So they've shed a good portion of their foreign reserves in the form of U.S. Treasuries. And I've noted the correlation between Donald Trump's ascendancy towards the Republican nomination, winning the nomination, and now looking like he's in a good position to win the presidency. If you take a look at the Smaulgld website or on the YouTube channel, you'll see an article about Mexican treasury holdings. You could check that out. I mentioned there's a correlation, not a causation, but there's indeed a correlation between the rise of Donald Trump and the decline in the value of the peso and the decline in the amount of securities, U.S. treasuries, that the Mexican government holds, or Mexicans in general. Remember, when these numbers, the Russian holdings of U.S. treasury securities, Chinese holdings, whatever they come from the U.S. Treasury, they're basically the amount of treasuries held in the country. They're not necessarily all the treasuries held in the country by the central bank. They also include foreign investment entities. But I guess in China's circumstance and in Russia, since they're communist countries, you can assume that most of or all, are held by the government, but not necessarily in Mexico. But in any event, here you can see that Russia has rebuilt its U.S. Treasury security portfolio. Um, it had been up to about $132 billion in January 2014, and then there were sanctions put on Russia. Russia, in response, sold off a good portion of its Treasury securities, but indeed it has built it back up. It had been down as low as about 65 billion. They hold about 88 billion as of the end of July. And another thing is, people don't realize this perhaps, that China is the #1 gold producing country in the world, and Russia is either second or third, depending on where Australia is, in their production. But what Russia has been doing is buying an increasing amount of their production and putting it straight into their central bank's gold reserves, which in effect turns those rubles into gold, which is kind of a smart thing to do since the value of gold is rising and the value of the ruble is declining. Anyway, thank you very much for paying attention today and listening and sitting through this podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to check out the Smaulgld Dark Side series, and also to subscribe to Smaulgld and to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thanks very much.